The military governments of Mali and Niger said in unison on Tuesday that they were rejecting their agreements of double taxation with France, thereby deepening their deteriorating relations and severing their links with the French capital. The administrations of the two Sahelian nations said in the statement that France's ongoing hostility toward their states and the uneven character of agreements had cost Mali and Niger a significant amount of money. The leaders of the two West African nations are former military officers who took over in coups. They have been taking action to break away from France, the former colonial power that was once a close ally in matters of security and other fields. The French soldiers who were stationed in Niger and Mali were expelled along with France from their countries. These soldiers were in the area to support the fight against the extremists. Nevertheless, following the coups, tensions increased since the newly elected leaders thought France had been holding them and her other former colonies as slaves for a very long period. There are even others who think that France is encouraging terrorism in its former colonies to keep those people coming to them for assistance so that France can take advantage of them. So, rejecting the agreement of double taxation with France is another serious blow to the French. However, the practical implications of these denunciations are not immediately clear. According to the French tax authorities' website, France has been connected to Mali and Niger, respectively, since 1972 and 1965 through agreements meant to prevent double taxation and set guidelines for mutual aid in tax concerns. The agreements cover personal and corporate income tax, inheritance tax, and registration duties. Since the military took over in Bamako in 2020 and Niamey in 2023, Mali and Niger's relations with France have been progressively deteriorating, with this denunciation being the most recent development. A few months prior, the government of Burkina Faso, another Sahelian nation overrun by the military in 2022, had already criticized the tax agreement with France. Mali's foreign ministry released a joint statement on social media, stating that the imbalanced nature of these agreements, along with France's ongoing hostility towards their states, has resulted in significant shortcomings for both Mali and Niger. With all this going on, the foreign ministers of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger met in Mali's capital, Bamako, early this month to establish plans to form a confederation of the three West African nations to bolster security, diplomacy, and development. The foreign ministers discussed the great potential that a strengthened political alliance offers for peace, stability, diplomatic strength, and economic development. Malian Foreign Minister Abdoulaye Diop mentioned that the recommendations would be presented to each head of state, who are scheduled to convene in Bamako on an unspecified date. The ministers of finance and economy of the participating nations suggested setting up an investment bank, a stabilization fund, and a commission to investigate the possibility of an economic and monetary union. Creating this confederation in the Sahel would be a significant step toward further unification. The three nations would be able to combine their resources and knowledge to tackle issues like poverty, climate change, and terrorism. In order to tackle counterterrorism or other threats, member states can, for instance, coordinate military activities and exchange intelligence. The revoking of this tax treaty with France shows how African countries want nothing again from the French. They now seek to tighten their allies with Russia. To improve relations, the leaders of some of these nations have been meeting with Russia's Deputy Minister of Defense. Such actions create awkward circumstances for France and other Western nations who have been abusing the Sahel. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have all expelled France, along with the French soldiers who were stationed there. These soldiers were present to support the Sahelian nations in their battle against the terrorists operating in the area. But following the coups, tensions increased since the new leaders thought France had been holding them and its other former colonies as slaves for a very long time. Some individuals even think that France is supporting terrorism in its former colonies to have those people constantly turn to them for assistance, which France will then take advantage of. France and Emmanuel Macron resisted leaving Niger because they had been exploiting resources from Niger for a long time by installing puppet leaders who will follow their orders. Despite Russia's military struggles in Ukraine, Moscow has not cut back its ambitions in the global south. Russia has increased its attention to the Sahel region of Africa, which is a volatile area that stretches roughly from Senegal to the Red Sea throughout the past year. Moscow is invading nations like Mali and Burkina Faso through the notorious Wagner mercenary group, and it is taking advantage of lapses in Western policy, escalating anti-European sentiment, and the persistent inability of both international and local actors to address the underlying causes of regional instability. Although Moscow pays a lot of attention to its proxies in Africa, its influence is not very deep or wide-ranging across the continent. However, Moscow's increasing influence in the Sahel has alarmed Washington due to the rising instability there. But there aren't many realistic ways for the Joe Biden government to respond. In 2013, France, the Sahel's former colonial power, took a traditional anti-terror approach to the region when it launched Operation Serval in Mali. The campaign was initially seen as a success, but the follow-on Operation Barkhane, which began in 2014, had a much larger mandate for the Sahel overall. At its peak, the Barkhane operation involved some 5,100 soldiers, which was far from sufficient to stop the jihadists from expanding their influence and maintain popular and regional government support for the battle. The United States' relationship with these African nations has also gotten worse. The Biden administration halted the nation's free trade access to American markets after the coups. Laws that forbid giving U.S. military or training support to nations of concern were also prompted by widespread human rights concerns. The Wagner Group's presence in the Sahel has alarmed U.S. officials, but the government doesn't seem willing or able to offer any other security support. ECOWAS also has been on the receiving end of protests in both countries, stoked at least in Mali by the government. The organization sanctioned Mali in early 2022, although it lifted the sanctions after the military regime committed to a 24-month timetable to return to civilian rule. It is working with the Burkinabe government to facilitate a similar transition, but has struggled to make headway. How has Russia gotten involved? Russia hasn't spent much time or money in Africa thus far. However, it is still gaining traction in several nations. Its presence defies Western attempts to isolate Russia by generating positive publicity. Russia has a checkered record, to be sure. It has struggled to gain traction in several African democracies and has found the greatest success in Sahelian governments that are severely unstable and isolated on the world scene. However, Moscow has demonstrated that it is capable of exploiting Africa's security gaps, instability, and shortcomings in governance. For instance, Moscow promptly transferred weaponry and military instructors from the Wagner Group to the Central African Republic in 2017 following its successful renegotiation of the UN Security Council's arms embargo. France had long exerted a major political and military influence over the KAR before the Russians arrived, but this alliance did not significantly aid Bangui in achieving stability, security, or economic growth. Although Wagner and other Russian groups are working in Mali, the government does not formally acknowledge their presence in the nation due to mounting proof of Russian mercenary actions and atrocities. Approximately 400 citizens were slain during an anti-terror operation that Wagner and the local military forces planned in the spring of 2022. Note that authorities in Mali have also disclosed the formalization of an agreement with Russia for the construction of a gold refinery in the country's capital, Bamako. This is a big move. This is one of the most recent partnerships between the two countries, involving several agreements, particularly about the development of the largest gold refinery in West Africa, with an annual capacity of 200 tons. According to Alosini Sanu, the Minister of Economy and Finance, the memorandum will go into effect for an unspecified 4 years. Sanu claims the project's goal is to accomplish thorough control over gold production while guaranteeing that all related taxes and duties are applied correctly. As France continuously takes blows from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, Russia is forcing its way into these countries. The termination of the tax agreements between France, Mali, and Niger marks a significant turning point in the relationship between these countries. This move is likely to have far-reaching consequences for the Sahel region, both economically and politically. It remains to be seen how this situation will unfold in the coming months and years. It is important to note that the situation is still evolving and there are many unknowns. The full impact of Mali and Niger's decision to terminate the agreements is yet to be seen. However, with the recent termination of the agreements, it remains to be seen how these countries will handle double taxation and exchange tax information in the future. We are also waiting to see how far Russia will integrate itself into the African continent. Do you think the nullification of this tax treaty with France is a result of the confederation Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali are forming? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to turn on notifications too, so you get notified whenever we upload videos like this. Thanks for watching and see you in our next video.